This presentation has been put together by a work group of the Greater Queensland Area Service Committee, formed to look at and provide information about the proposals developed by NA World Services that may help us better carry the NA message. These ideas have come to be known as the Service System Project. Much more information about the project can be found on the project webpage www.na.org/service-system.
The service system proposals suggest nearby groups get together at group support forums every month or two. Twice a year, or maybe more often, a local service conference is attended by representatives from the various group support forums. Group representatives and interested members may also wish to attend. Here, the fellowship decides upon the general direction they wish their services to go. The day-to-day service delivery is handled by a local service board. This board takes its direction from and is accountable to the local service conference, also maintaining ongoing communication with the group support forums. The first and most important thing to mention about the service system proposals are the broad principles that underpin them, things like group support, planning and collective decision making. The proposals offer a model that may help us improve how we put these principles into practice.
The Service System Project grew out of a need to try and address some of the issues that service bodies throughout the world struggle with. Too few trusted servants, a poor atmosphere of recovery at service meetings, duplication of efforts, poor communication, the list goes on. If you've been involved in service, chances are you're familiar with many of the issues. Most of us have encountered them in our service experience. The project began after the 2008 World Service Conference. Delegates passed proposals to form a work group to look at issues in the service structure that bothered many of us. That work group started by looking to the traditions and concepts. They realised we must start with a shared vision as a fellowship. So their first task was to offer a vision for NA service, which passed unanimously at the 2010 World Service Conference. The proposals were given in principle support at the 2014 World Service Conference. These proposals are not mandatory. They're offered in a spirit of unity in the hope they will help us decide how to fulfil our primary purpose. Should we continue with our current service structure or move to adapt the proposals of the new service system?
So, how can these new service system proposals help us achieve our vision and better carry the message? Our basic text is clear. Everything that occurs in the course of NA service must be motivated by the desire to more successfully carry the NA message to the addict who still suffers. The most important job of the service system is grounded in the fifth tradition to support the groups in achieving their primary purpose, and so forums to help support groups are proposed. The Group Support Forum, or GSF, is a place to discuss group problems and successes away from budgets and motions. It is the service equivalent of one addict helping another. All interested members, not just group service representatives, are encouraged to come. It's a friendly, discussion-based gathering where newer members can learn more about NA, where more experienced members can share their experiences and actively mentor others. Group support forums could also be a place for literature distribution, workshops and training sessions, for finding members to serve on H&I panels, planning barbecues or unity days. The exact nature of a group support forum will vary from place to place, but the key is that they focus on the needs of the groups. The proposals describe group support forums as neighbourhood-sized. The Greater Queensland Area would have a number of group support forums. Large NA communities such as Brisbane may prefer a group support forum that includes all of the groups in Brisbane to improve communication across their community. Alternatively, they may prefer several smaller sized group support forums with less distance to travel for those who are interested and a more informal atmosphere. Communities who currently operate locales, Townsville and the Sunshine Coast, may simply want to change the focus of some of their committee meetings to a group focus. Smaller NA communities with perhaps one or two groups, such as Mackay, may be able to participate in another group support forum electronically. Members from Rockhampton and Yeppoon may wish to share their experience in a group support forum. Toowoomba, a community that currently has 3 groups, may find a group support forum useful to address the issues that a newly reformed and growing fellowship will doubtless face. These sorts of decisions will be made by the people concerned after careful consideration of the challenges faced and the resources available. Some communities have already experimented with group support forums, notably Cairns, Townsville and Benlee. Due to the distances between NA communities in Queensland, we believe group support forums may decide to have one group support forum delegate who would attend a Queensland Service Conference and then report back to the groups in their group support forum, rather than each group attending. Or the groups may decide to attend both their group support forum and a Queensland Service Conference. Along with group focus, flexibility is one of the foundation principles of the new proposals. We can adapt and modify these proposals in ways that best suit our needs.
We've already mentioned that 2 of the foundation principles of the service system proposals are group focused and flexible. The other 3 foundation principles are purpose driven, collaborative and geographically based. These are each integral to the local service conference and the local service board. These 2 bodies together would accomplish most of NA's service delivery. We envisage our local service conference, perhaps called the Queensland Service Conference, as a twice yearly, in-person, plan-driven meeting. Perhaps 2 additional meetings per year could be held via Skype or phone. As our Area Service Committee does now, decisions would be consensus-based. One of the yearly in-person meetings of the Queensland Service Conference might be an annual planning assembly, where group support forum delegates and interested members of the community gather to set service priorities for the year ahead. This annual planning assembly would ensure that the groups set the general direction of services. The other local service conferences are opportunities for communication, oversight and careful selection of leaders. As much as possible, the discussions and decisions at the Queensland Service Conference would be concerned with strategic direction and oversight. Administrative decisions and details would be delegated to the Queensland Service Board, which is then accountable to the Queensland Service Conference. The combination of the Queensland Service Conference and the Queensland Service Board balance the delegations spoken of in the 3rd concept, with the group responsibility and authority called for in the 2nd concept. The local service board, the Queensland Service Board, would be more detail orientated than the Queensland Service Conference. The Queensland Service Board would do the day-to-day work to accomplish the goals and realise the vision directed by the Queensland Service Conference. The conference would be the architects, the board would be the builders. The Queensland Service Board would report to and be overseen by the Queensland Service Conference. The board would create plans and a budget which would then be presented and amended when necessary at the conference. The hands-on service delivery may be accomplished by work groups led by coordinators or by committees. The board would make recommendations depending on what seems to make the most practical sense at the time. In short, these proposals suggest a separation between these three types of concerns. 1. Group issues and needs are handled at the Group Support Forum. 2. Strategic decisions and general oversight of services would be handled at the Queensland Service Conference. 3. Day-to-day administration of services would be handled by the Queensland Service Board.
So far, we've talked about the new service system proposal in a fairly theoretical way. Let's acknowledge we are not starting with a blank canvas. There have been NA services in Queensland for about 30 years. Let's have a quick look at some of the evolution. In the early 1990s, the idea of neighbourhood service bodies was named locales. The concept was adopted in an attempt to meet the needs of the fellowship as they were seen at the time. The concept was an adaptation. It doesn't appear exactly the way we do it in NA service literature. The concept was widely accepted, although acceptance wasn't universal. Locales were established on the Gold and Sunshine Coast, Brisbane, Toowoomba and Cairns. The locales meant monthly, operating like a mini area. The Queensland Area Service meeting rotated between the locales in the southeast corner, one locale hosting, the other sending representatives. Communication with Cairns via written report. At some stage, Townsville also formed a locale. Cairns stopped having a functioning locale, the concept not being universally accepted as it doesn't appear in the NA literature. They briefly experimented as an autonomous area. Currently, Cairns are part of the Greater Queensland Area. By the early 2000s, the Gold Coast had become an autonomous area, and the fellowship in Toowoomba had wound up. In the rest of Queensland, which then became known as the Greater Queensland Area, things went on as before. The locales in Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast alternatively hosting the area service meeting. Brisbane soon tired of attending both their locale and the area service meeting, opting to attend only the area service meeting, and so the Brisbane locale meeting closed. After the last Area Service Committee meeting held on the Sunshine Coast, not being attended by anyone from the Sunshine Coast, all area service meetings were held in Brisbane, the Sunshine Coast locale sending a representative to the ASC. The population centres outside the southeast corner gradually became all but forgotten by an area service committee comprised increasingly of members all from Brisbane. Representatives from the Queensland Area Service Committee visiting Cairns and Townsville in 2004-2005, then not again until 2014-2015.
In 2016, NA in Queensland looks something like this. There are two NA areas, the Gold Coast area with about 22 groups and the Greater Queensland Area. To the best of our current knowledge, the NA landscape of the Greater Queensland Area looks something like this. There are about 59 groups holding 63 weekly meetings, from Beenleigh in our south to Cairns in the far north, the distance between them being 1,738 kilometres or 20 and a half hours drive. 5 Cairns groups have been experimenting with a group support forum for the last couple of years. 3 groups in Townsville gather as a locale. They have also experimented with the group support forum concept. There's 1 group in Mackay, Yeppoon and Rockhampton respectively. 2 groups in Gympie cooperate with the 14 Sunshine Coast groups, meeting monthly at the Sunshine Coast locale. There are 3 groups in Toowoomba. In Brisbane and Logan cities combined, there are approximately 34 groups. Unfortunately, in the last year or two, meetings in Hervey Bay, Bundaberg, Kingaroy and Mergen have closed. The Greater Queensland Area Service Committee meets monthly in Brisbane. It is typically attended by less than 10 Brisbane GSRs and a representative from the Sunshine Coast locale, as well as the office bearers and subcommittee chairs. The Area Service Committee receives financial support from groups throughout Queensland. We do our best to deliver services and be as supportive as possible of all our groups, as well as other levels of service. The proposed system involves a number of changes. Perhaps it's helpful to think in terms of an evolution rather than a revolution. Change might be difficult. Nonetheless, we owe it to ourselves and to those we serve to do what we can to improve our ability to carry the NA message. Our basic text tells us, we must realise that we are not perfect. There will always be room for growth. Just like our personal program, our service delivery will never be perfect. There will always be room for growth. One of the more controversial elements of the service system proposals is the idea that service bodies are, where practical, defined by geographic boundaries. This is, in fact, one of the 5 main foundation principles of the proposals. For us, this would mean state borders. The reason for this recommendation are threefold. Number 1, to avoid duplication of services. 2, to make sure all parts of the state are covered by a service body, and 3, to make NA more visible to addicts who are trying to find us, as well as members of the public who refer addicts to us. All aspects of PR efforts, including H&I, outreach and fellowship development, are enhanced when service bodies conform to recognised geographic boundaries. Still, it's important to recognise that for us, being defined by geographic boundaries may eventually mean unifying with a neighbouring area, possibly a daunting task. What seems crucial is better communication and collaboration with our neighbours, with an eye to having a conversation about possible unification down the road. The first step for us would just be to open communication with the Gold Coast Area Service Committee, bringing together trusted servants. A shared learning day or a series of meetings with trusted servants of both areas will help open the lines of communication, and communication would be a necessary first step towards any possible collaboration, another foundation principle of the service system proposals. We may want to start considering sharing some services if it makes sense to do so. For example, sharing a phone line and further cooperation in providing information about Queensland-wide meeting information. Greater Queensland already prints meetings lists that include Gold Coast meetings information. Eventually, at some point, that may lead to discussion and ultimately decisions about whether it makes sense to combine our neighbouring service bodies, and it may not. These are decisions that will be made collaboratively at a future time. Whether the Gold Coast and the Greater Queensland Area eventually reunify or not, it seems to make sense to us that an NA service body has responsibility for communicating and liaising with Queensland-wide services, such as Queensland Health. Should a service body coordinate communication with all the service bodies in Queensland? It makes sense to us that we would welcome all groups in the state of Queensland, or anywhere else for that matter, regardless of their affiliation or participation in a particular area, to attend the Queensland Service Conference. Equally, we believe nomination to the Queensland Service Board could be open to anyone who identifies as being affiliated to NA in Queensland, provided they meet any requirements that the fellowship may decide upon, such as clean time. We're suggesting we leave a welcoming door open to future growth and collaboration. avoiding as strenuously as we can an attitude of us versus them. As we have written in It Works How and Why, unity is the spirit that joins thousands of members around the world in a spiritual fellowship that has the power to change lives. Let's finish this presentation with a quick overview of what the new proposals might look like. Local group support forums meet every month or two. Group support forum delegates, group representatives, and interested members get together at the Queensland Service Conference, where a Queensland Service Board is selected. Services are prioritised, strategic plans developed, and budgets approved. A Queensland Service Board is responsible for the day-to-day delivery of services. They report and are accountable to the NA groups via the Queensland Service Conference. We hope this presentation has been helpful. We look forward to both your continued service and any questions about these proposals.